My brother-in-law showed up at my office and demanded I hand over my savings, screaming, "It's your duty as a wife's sister." When I refused, he made a scene in front of my boss. My boss smirked and said, "Actually, I think you'll want to leave now." When the cops showed up, my brother-in-law's face went white. I never thought my work and personal life would collide like this, but here we are. Let me start from the beginning. I have an older sister, Sophia. We were never particularly close, mostly because of the choices she made in life and the kind of people she surrounded herself with. One of those choices was her husband, Derek. From the first time I met him, I knew he was bad news. He was loud, arrogant, and had this entitled attitude like the world owed him something. He bragged about making big moves in real estate, but in reality, he was just jumping from one failed scheme to another, dragging my sister along with him. For years, I kept my distance. I had my own life to focus on. I worked hard to build my career, saved diligently, and kept a small but steady social circle. Meanwhile, Sophia and Derek were always in some kind of financial mess. They lived beyond their means, leased expensive cars, rented a house way out of their budget, took lavish vacations they couldn't afford. And whenever things got tight, they conveniently borrowed money from family. The problem was, they never paid anyone back. I learned early on never to lend them anything. My parents had made that mistake and regretted it. Every time they loaned them money, it disappeared, and Derek always had some excuse about how the market was down or some big deal was about to close. Eventually, my parents stopped giving in, and I made it clear that I wouldn't be their personal ATM either. But Derek? He never forgot about my savings. I had been saving aggressively for years. I wanted financial security, a home of my own, and a future where I wouldn't have to worry. Somehow, he got wind of it, probably through Sophia, though I don't know if she volunteered the information or if he pried it out of her. Either way, I became his target. It started with small hints. At family gatherings, he'd joke, "Hey, family should help family. You're doing so well. Maybe you can throw a little help our way." I always laughed it off or changed the subject. Then, the requests became more direct. "You wouldn't even feel it, but it would change our lives," he'd say, as if that was my responsibility. I refused every time. I wasn't going to fund his reckless lifestyle. Then came the guilt trips. "Do you even care about your sister? She's struggling. What kind of person just sits back and watches family suffer?" I reminded him that he was the one making her struggle, not me. If they lived within their means, they wouldn't be in this situation. Of course, that didn't go over well. When manipulation didn't work, the anger started. He'd get frustrated, scoff, roll his eyes, complain to my parents. But since they had already been through the same cycle, they just told him off. That's when he escalated. The day Derek showed up at my work, it was a normal Tuesday morning. I was at my desk, deep into a project, when the receptionist called. "There's a Derek here asking to see you," she said hesitantly. My stomach dropped. I knew exactly what this was about. I considered telling her to send him away, but I didn't want to cause a scene. I worked for a reputable law firm in downtown Chicago. I had spent years building my career there, and the last thing I needed was my brother-in-law embarrassing me in front of my colleagues. I sighed and told her to send him up. He stormed in like he owned the place, wearing that cocky smirk I hated. He didn't even bother with pleasantries. "You've been dodging my calls," he said, arms crossed. "I've been busy," I replied coolly. "Well, I'll make this quick then. We need the money. Now." I stared at him, barely believing his audacity. "What?" "You heard me," he snapped. "Sophia and I are in a tight spot. You've got the money. It's your duty as a wife's sister to help. Family takes care of family." I was stunned. He said it like it was some law written in stone. "I don't owe you anything," I said, keeping my voice calm. "And I'm certainly not giving you my savings." His face twisted in rage. "Are you serious? You're just gonna let us suffer? After everything we've done for you?" That made me laugh. "What exactly have you done for me, Derek?" That was the wrong thing to say. His voice rose and heads started turning. "You're a selfish little—" Before he could finish, my boss walked over. Paul, the managing partner, was an intimidating man. He was tall, confident, and had a way of making people feel small with just a look. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Derek turned to him, puffing out his chest. "Yeah, there's a problem. Your employee here is hoarding money while her own sister is struggling." "What kind of person does that?" Paul looked at me, then back at Derek. He smirked, and said, "Actually, I think you'll want to leave now." Derek scoffed. "And why the hell would I do that?" Paul pulled out his phone, pressed a button, and said, "Security, we have a trespasser on the 23rd floor." Derek's face paled instantly. "You're calling security? Are you serious?" Paul shrugged. "You're harassing my employee in her workplace. That's a liability issue. I take that very seriously." Derek turned back to me. "Are you seriously okay with this? You're gonna let them kick me out?" I crossed my arms. I told you no, Derek. You made a scene. This is on you. Security arrived within minutes. By then, Derek had gone from angry to frantic. He tried arguing, but Paul shut it down immediately. If you don't leave now, we'll call the cops, Paul said, voice completely even. I thought that would be the end of it. I really did. But Derek made one last mistake. As security grabbed his arm to escort him out, he shoved one of them. Hard. Everything happened so fast. The guard stumbled back, regained his footing, and before Derek could react, he was on the ground, face against the floor, with a knee in his back. Then came the words that changed everything. Sir, you're under arrest for assault. Derek went completely white. Derek went white as the cops showed up the second those words left the security guard's mouth. Derek's whole demeanor changed. He stopped fighting, stopped yelling. His face drained of color like all the arrogance had just been punched out of him. I didn't mean to, he stammered, trying to squirm out from under the guard's grip. It was a mistake. By then, the whole office was watching. Phones were out, people whispering. My coworkers, lawyers, paralegals, assistants, were all frozen in place, staring at the mess unfolding in front of them. Paul, my boss, stood with his arms crossed, looking down at Derek like he was nothing more than an inconvenience. You should have left when you had the chance. 2 police officers walked in at that exact moment. One of them, a middle-aged cop with a tired face, sighed like this was the last thing he wanted to deal with today. The other, younger and more serious-looking, immediately assessed the situation. What's going on here? The older cop asked. The security guard, still holding Derek down, responded. This guy refused to leave after being asked multiple times. Then he shoved me when I tried to escort him out. Derek twisted his head to look at the officers. Come on, man. It wasn't like that. I barely touched him. He's exaggerating. The younger officer didn't look impressed. Sir, you don't get to decide that. Derek's eyes darted around the room, probably hoping someone, me, would step in to defend him. I didn't move. The older cop rubbed his temple. All right, let's take this outside. Get him up. The security guard let go, and Derek slowly pushed himself to his feet. His hands were shaking. I could see the gears turning in his head, trying to figure out how to talk his way out of this. Then, in a desperate move, he turned to me. This is your fault, he hissed. You could have stopped this. I just stared at him, unfazed. You did this to yourself. That seemed to hit him hard. His mouth opened like he wanted to argue, but nothing came out. He clenched his jaw, his hands forming fists at his sides. The officers grabbed his arms, and he didn't resist, but I could tell he was furious. As they led him out, I caught Paul shaking his head with amusement. What a mess. Then he turned to me. Take the rest of the day if you need it. I nodded, grateful, but I wasn't going anywhere just yet. Because I knew this wasn't over. The fallout begins barely an hour past before my phone started blowing up. First, it was my sister, Sophia. Sophia, what the hell did you do? I didn't respond. I was still at work, and frankly, I wasn't in the mood to deal with her hysteria. A few minutes later, another text came in. Sophia, Derek just got arrested. You need to fix this. I took a deep breath and finally responded. Me, I didn't do anything. He showed up at my job, caused a scene, refused to leave, then shoved security. That's why he got arrested. Her reply came almost instantly. Sophia, you could have de-escalated. Why didn't you just give him the money? We're family. I actually laughed out loud at that one. Me, that's not how this works, Sophia. I don't owe him or you anything. Silence. Then, about 10 minutes later, my phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. When I finally listened, I rolled my eyes so hard I nearly saw the inside of my skull. It was Sophia, crying, saying she couldn't believe I would betray her like this. That I had ruined her life. That I was cold, selfish, heartless. Not once did she acknowledge that Derek was in the wrong. Not once did she ask if I was okay. I deleted the voicemail and went back to work. But it didn't stop there. The smear campaign, by the time I got home that evening, my parents had called, my cousins had texted, and somehow, the drama had made its way to distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Apparently, Sophia and Derek had decided to spin the story their way. According to them, I had set Derek up. I had lied to my boss to get him arrested. I had turned my back on family in their time of need. And people were eating it up. Some relatives were demanding to know why I would do this to my own sister. Others were saying I needed to fix things before it was too late. I was exhausted, furious, but most of all, I was done. I called my mom. She picked up on the first ring. I assume you've heard, I said dryly. She sighed. I have. And? I know Sophia is being dramatic, but did you really have to get the cops involved? I clenched my jaw. I didn't. My boss did. Security did. Because Derek wouldn't leave. There was a long pause. Then, finally, my mom muttered, "That boy is an idiot." I huffed out a humorless laugh. "Took you long enough to admit it." "I just don't want this to tear the family apart," she said, her voice tired. "Maybe Derek should have thought about that before storming into my office and demanding my life savings," I shot back. She sighed again, but this time, she didn't argue. That was enough for me. Then things got worse. I thought that would be the worst of it. The phone calls, the texts, the family drama. But I underestimated just how desperate Derek was. Because 2 days later, I found out he had bailed himself out, and he wasn't done with me yet. Derek got out, and he wasn't done with me yet. 2 days after his dramatic arrest, just as I was beginning to breathe again, I got a text from an unknown number. "Unknown number? You think you've won? You have no idea what's coming." I stared at my phone, my stomach tightening. It didn't take a genius to figure out who it was. Derek had bailed himself out. I should have expected this. Derek was the type of person who never took responsibility for his actions. He was always the victim, always the one who was wronged. And in his mind, I was now the enemy. I blocked the number immediately, but something told me this wasn't over. And I was right. The home invasion attempt that night, I was home, curled up on my couch with a glass of wine, finally relaxing after the chaos of the past few days. My apartment, a modest but comfortable one-bedroom in Chicago's Lincoln Park, was my sanctuary. I'd worked hard to afford it, and it was mine. But at around 11:30 p.m., my peaceful night was shattered. A loud bang echoed through my apartment. I shot up, my heart slamming against my ribs. Another bang. Someone was at my front door, kicking it. I grabbed my phone and ran to the peephole, my breath caught in my throat. And there he was. Derek. Red-faced. Wild-eyed. Fists clenched. I could hear him muttering to himself, then bang. Another kick. Panic surged through me. I stumbled back, already dialing 911. The dispatcher picked up immediately. 911? What's your emergency? My brother-in-law is trying to break into my apartment, I whispered, my voice shaking. He was just arrested 2 days ago, but he's outside kicking my door in. The dispatcher's tone changed instantly. Are you alone? Is there another way out? I'm alone, I whispered. No other exits. Stay on the line. Officers are on the way. Another bang. Then, Derek's voice, slurred and furious. You think you can ruin my life and get away with it? Huh? Open the damn door. I pressed myself against the farthest wall, shaking. I knew he was unhinged, but this was beyond anything I had imagined. Minutes passed like hours. Then, sirens. The sound of them jolted Derek out of whatever drunken rage he was in. I heard him curse, then the pounding stopped. I peeked through the peephole again, just in time to see him sprinting down the hallway. Then came the shouts. Chicago PD. Stop right there. I didn't even realize I was crying until I felt the wetness on my cheeks. A few moments later, there was a knock, a much calmer one this time. Ma'am? It's the police. I took a shaky breath, unlocked the door, and opened it to find 2 uniformed officers standing there. One of them, a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes, asked, "Are you okay?" I nodded quickly, wiping my face. "Did you get him?" The officer nodded. "We caught him trying to run down the stairwell. He's in custody." Relief flooded me so fast I almost collapsed. But as I was thanking them, the second officer frowned at his radio. He stepped aside, listening intently. Then he muttered something to his partner. She turned back to me, her face unreadable. "Ma'am, we need you to come down to the station with us." I blinked. "Why?" The officer hesitated, then said, "Because Derek wasn't acting alone tonight. The real mastermind." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" The officer exchanged a look with his partner, then sighed. "Your sister, Sophia, was the one who drove him here." For a moment, I couldn't even process what he was saying. "Sophia?" I repeated blankly. "Yeah," the officer said grimly. "She was waiting in the car outside. When we arrested Derek, she tried to speed off, but another patrol car cut her off. She's being brought in now." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I had known she would be mad. I had known she would defend Derek. But I had never thought she would help him try to break into my home. She knew what he was doing? I stammered. The officer nodded. "From what we can tell, yes. And depending on how involved she was, she might be facing charges, too." I felt numb. This was my sister, my own flesh and blood. And she had helped this lunatic try to terrorize me. I grabbed my coat, my mind racing as I followed the officers down to the squad car. Because one thing was clear now. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was war. This was war. The ride to the station felt surreal. The streets of Chicago blurred past the car window, but my mind was stuck in a loop, replaying everything that had led up to this moment. Derek storming into my office. The screaming. The arrest. My phone blowing up with my sister's rage. Then tonight, him outside my apartment, trying to break down my door. And now I knew Sophia had been in on it. I wasn't sure which part of that made my stomach churn more, the fact that she had driven him there, or the fact that she hadn't even tried to warn me. The officer driving finally broke the silence. "You don't have to talk to them if you don't want to," he said, eyes flicking to me in the rearview mirror. "But I'd recommend you at least hear what they have to say." I swallowed hard. Is she under arrest?" "Not yet," he said carefully. "That depends on what she says. Right now, she's being detained for questioning." I wasn't sure if that made me feel better or worse. The interrogation room when we arrived at the station, they led me into a side room. A standard interrogation room like you'd see in any crime show. Gray walls, metal table, too bright fluorescent lighting. And sitting across the table was Sophia. Her hands were clasped in her lap, her face blotchy from crying. She looked up as I entered, and for a brief moment, I saw something in her expression: relief? Hope? But just as quickly, it was gone. "Take a seat," the officer instructed. I sat down slowly, my eyes never leaving Sophia's. The officer leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Your sister agreed to speak with you." He turned to me. "Do you want this conversation recorded?" I hesitated. "Yes." The officer nodded and pressed a button on a small device. "All right, you can talk." Silence stretched between us. Then, Sophia let out a shaky breath. "I didn't know he was going to do that." I scoffed. "You drove him there." I thought he just wanted to talk to you," she stammered. "I didn't know he was going to try and break in." I swear. I narrowed my eyes. "And when he started kicking my door in? When you heard him screaming? What, you just sat in the car and did nothing?" Sophia's lip trembled. I was scared. I clenched my fists. "Scared of what? That he'd get caught? Or that maybe you were finally realizing the kind of person you married?" She flinched at that. For the first time in years, I saw something in my sister's eyes that wasn't entitlement, wasn't anger, wasn't manipulation. I saw fear. And then it hit me. "You're afraid of him," I said, my voice quieter now. Sophia's eyes darted away. I leaned forward. "He's hurt you, hasn't he?" Her shoulders shook. She didn't answer, but she didn't have to. I felt my stomach twist. My sister, who had spent years defending Derek, excusing him, covering for him, was sitting in front of me, barely holding herself together. "Why didn't you just leave?" I asked. Her breath hitched. "Because he said if I ever left him, he'd destroy me." And just like that, everything fell into place. I had spent so long resenting my sister, so long thinking she was just as manipulative as Derek, that I never stopped to consider that maybe she was just trapped. I sat back, exhaling slowly. "Sophia, do you want out?" She swallowed hard, still avoiding my gaze. "Because if you do," I said carefully, "this is your chance." She finally looked at me. And for the first time in years, I saw the sister I used to know, the one who laughed with me as kids, who protected me from bullies, who wasn't just Derek's wife. Tears spilled down her cheeks. And she gave the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. The fallout: Derek was officially charged with attempted breaking and entering, harassment, and assault on a security guard. His record meant the judge didn't go easy on him. He was denied bail this time. Sophia, on the other hand, finally filed for divorce. It wasn't easy. Derek fought it every step of the way, sending her threatening letters from jail, using every trick he could to manipulate her. But this time, she had help. Me. I got her in touch with a divorce lawyer, one of the best at my firm. She moved in with our parents temporarily, started going to therapy, and for the first time in years, she started looking like herself again. Our relationship wasn't magically fixed overnight. Years of resentment don't just disappear. But for the first time, she wasn't choosing Derek over me. She was choosing herself. A few months later, as I sat across from Sophia at a quiet cafe, I asked her something that had been on my mind. "Do you regret it?" She stirred her coffee, thinking. "Regret what?" "Everything. Him." She exhaled slowly. "I regret staying as long as I did." Then, after a pause, she added, "And I regret hurting you." I nodded. That was all I needed to hear. We weren't the same sisters we used to be. There was too much between us now, too many wounds. But for the first time in years, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we had a shot at being family again. And as for Derek? Well, he's exactly where he belongs.